Hello, it's Dr. Brian McDonough. Welcome to the Dr. Brian McDonough Show. I have a very special guest today. His name is Brian O'Neill. Now, you may not know Brian O'Neill from around the country, in fact, from around the world if you're watching this, but if you're in the Philadelphia area, you probably know him. Now, he is a success story, and that certainly is interesting. But what he has done to achieve success is just fascinating. Brian O'Neill, when I first met him, he was earlier in his career, but he was kind of an underdog guy. He had big dreams. He had five brothers. He basically, if I recall right, was kicked out of one high school, dropped out of another, had disagreed with his father, was out on his own. He did all these sorts of things, and yet somehow rose, believed in himself, believed in others, and achieved some incredible things. So Brian O'Neill is my guest, joining me on the Dr. Brian McDonough Show right after this.
The Dr. Brian McDonough Show.
Hi, Brian. It is so great to have you on the show, and
Great to be here, Brian. It's great to see you.
You know, for people who obviously wouldn't know, I know Brian O'Neill more from staying on the sidelines of grade school football games, basketball games, watching our kids being asked to fill in for a second to hold sideline markers, all sorts of things. And I think that's the best way to get to know somebody. You get to know somebody and you realize they're there for their family. And I can tell about you off the bat, just knowing you, that was always your priority.
It still is, Brian. So I spend all my free time with my family, with my wife and kids.
And I will say this, and I'm not going to say this. My wife will agree with me. His wife Miriam is the best thing that ever happened to him. I don't care what he did. His wife is the best thing that happened to him. And it's always been fun to know you, but more importantly, kind of to share your story. Because one of the reasons I started this program was to talk to people about their lives, to talk to people about what they've done, why they're successful, if they have regrets, the path they took, and to share that for others. Because one of the great things about the internet is it lets you just kind of talk as long as you want with whoever you want and have fun with it. So, Brian, I want to start out and talk about the beginning of your career. And obviously, I want to get to what you're doing now. But at the beginning of your career, I kind of set it up. You wouldn't have thought there would be a lot of success. You would have thought this was like a James Dean rebel without a cause sort of a thing. Tell me about your early life and what led you to where you have gotten today.
So, I grew up in a house with six boys. My father was in the restaurant business. We all worked in the restaurant. So when my friends were going to parties on Friday night, I was waiting tables. It gave us great work ethic. I learned differently. When I was growing up, there was one track, and that was, what they taught in school. And if you learned differently, you didn't fit into that track. I was creative and smart, but did not sit still in a classroom. And so I got kicked out of 8th grade in my grade school, freshman year in my first school, sophomore year in my second school, and junior year in my third school, and quit. I was always very successful and enterprising. I just had no time for school and the way they were teaching me, and they had no time for the way I elected not to learn from them. And so I actually moved out of my house and rented an apartment and started in business, initially buying and selling cars, and then ultimately got in the real estate business.
So, we look back on those years, and anybody who's our age remembers those years. It was kind of cookie cutter, yet there weren't many ways to go. I think there's a greater understanding of people and kind of letting them kind of explore their personalities and play to their strengths now. Probably not as much as we'd like, but there is. But
Yeah.
you had the guts to kind of say, this isn't working, and I know I'm going to bet on myself, even at that early age.
Well, I think that was an induced bet on myself, because the schools were as happy to get rid of me as I was to leave. And my departure was well earned. I was an opinionated young guy and had my own agenda, and it didn't fit in with their agenda. And I understand that. I hold no resentment. I've gone back and built buildings in those schools. But at the time, I felt that their teaching was boring. It didn't resonate. And my view of teaching is not about teaching, it's about the student learning. And, there were a few great teachers that I had, but for the most part, I didn't connect. And so I didn't have a choice. I was out of school. I had to do something. I was not going to go get a job that an MBA or a college graduate would get. So I started selling cars and buying and selling and painting houses, which were both professions that were available to somebody with my credentials.
What's interesting about what you said, though, really early on, though, was you kind of were raised in a family that told you the value of work, that if you work, you can achieve things. And obviously, that was the first thing you did. You went back to what you knew.
Right. We all worked hard every day of our life. And my father worked hard and my mother worked hard. There were times my mother had 2 and 3 jobs, and she'd run home and throw fish sticks in the oven and go back out to work. And so we were exposed to hard work, but we also learned that, we didn't want to be in the same businesses that my father was in, because we looked at how much stress he was under and how unprofitable and stressful the restaurant business was. And so we also learned what we didn't want to do in life.
Mm-hmm.
And, none of my brothers ended up in that business for good reason. And they've all done very, very well in their own right. But, when you're in the restaurant business, especially one that's marginally profitable or unprofitable in a given moment, you're transacting hundreds of times a night. Each customer is a transaction. Getting purveyors is a transaction. Making payroll is a transaction. So fortunately, I was given the opportunity to run my father's restaurants at a very young age. And then my brother Mike ran those restaurants. So at like 15, I was negotiating with vendors and processing payroll and figuring out how to save expenses. And so, we learned how to run a business. And even though that's not a business I recommend for anybody, because the hours are long and the reward is not commensurate with the work, it was a great training ground for us as children.
I never asked my dad this, but it's very interesting. Like, he grew up, obviously born in 1920, but he came in, son of an Irish immigrant, mother Irish immigrant, comes in very poor, kind of goes through high school, kind of similar path, different, but the same in the sense, finding a way to start a company, to do things. He went into the furniture business. One thing led to another. He became successful. But when I look at him, I look at you, I look at somebody like me who just kind of went through school, played the game, did the steps. It was a lot easier to do what I did. And yet, you, for one reason, my dad, for another reason, went other paths. But there's a lot of people who do what you did, my dad did, and they don't become as successful or greatly successful or whatever. They just kind of peter out. What was the difference? I never asked my dad that, but what was the difference with you? Why was it an internal drive, some fire burning? What was it that allowed you to move forward?
So I think a number of things. You mentioned one earlier. I met a great girl very young in my career. Miriam Palillo, now Miriam O'Neill, has been with me 45 years. That showed me a different way to look at life. She had gotten a full scholarship to Villanova and now has 2, postgraduate degrees. Very steady, grounded, nice, and attractive, if I do say so myself. And so, I learned a lot from her about how to have a steady course. Not that my course has ever been steady, but it was steadier because of our relationship. I think that there was a lot of heartache that we all experienced as young kids growing up in our household, and that tends to have you desire a different path for your kids. And I'm pleased to say that my kids had a very different path than I did in education and exposure and peace and harmony and everything else. But I think the other thing is you have to choose what you want in life. And nothing is easy, And there are fundamental skills that you don't learn in school, even at Harvard, in their MBA program. They don't teach you the basics of building a business and operating for yourself. And I was fortunate that I had an uncle, Eustace Wolfington, still around. He's one of my best friends in the world, took an interest in me at a young age, took me into his dealership, and not just enabled me to sell cars, but showed me how the business ran. I watched him train and hire good people and build management teams. I had a gentleman, Ira Ingerman, who was an early partner of mine, a very successful Jewish man that took me under his wing and explained to me how to do contracts and financing and how to leverage, your growth in a business, how to understand numbers. Taught me never to use a computer, and I don't today. I do all my numbers in my head on every one of my 11 companies, and I practice that at night for years, so that I can walk into any meeting with anybody at any time of day or night, and I know those numbers as well as they know those numbers. But I have them all in my head. I don't have anything in writing or on a computer or a telephone. It's all in my head, and I practice that. So when you begin to understand math and how everything in life, aside from personal relationships, is a mathematical equation, then you begin to create ratios. And when you understand those ratios, you can scale a business. And so, for example, we were renovating warehouses in the 80s and 90s and converting them to tech space. We had a team of suppliers, same ones, Carrier Air Conditioning, a window vendor, a kind of Billy Santora, and some other people. Same people every time, same design every time. I could literally go to a building, pace, length times width, divided by 3, and know to the penny what it cost me to build that building. So I was making a decision in a minute that took my competition months of analysis to get to. But it was because we had created systems and ratios that were mathematical, and we knew what rent we could get and what the debt and equity needed to be. And so we could size up a deal, make an offer, and close on it without months of analysis. And I've tried to apply that to all my businesses and teach my managers and employees. I have 7,000 employees now. I have multiple managers at different levels so that they can scale their own business. I think the other thing I learned early on, you cannot do it alone. I have grown because of the great people I have around me. And I give incredible latitude to all my team members to run their own businesses as if they own them. And if you're a typical corporation, the person ahead of you is afraid of you getting ahead because you might make them look bad. In my company, we call it the elevator theory. We sit on top of the elevator. Our employees are in the elevator. The higher they go, the higher we go. And so we're always encouraging, new members of our team at all ages. And I hire people at all ages. I just hired somebody who's 64 years old, that they have no barrier and no limitation, that they can go as far and as fast as they want. They just have to do it the right way, and they have to understand mathematically what they need to achieve. And I think that's been a great benefit that I have, because I have no corporate rules and regulations I need to follow. I have the obvious, the legal and compliance and all that, but we don't have politics in our companies. So people are able to thrive. I don't tolerate backbiting. It's a familial atmosphere at every level, and we challenge people to find the best they can do. We push them hard, but we reward them when they do well, and we give them opportunities they wouldn't get otherwise. So that's helped us grow a lot.
So it's a sense of ownership, which allows the people who work with you to feel pride in what they do. It's interesting you mentioned the math part too, because I've always said that I could, if I had you as a patient 17 years ago, I would probably still remember your potassium, your sodium, and physics. But if I was playing tennis with you and someone else, I'd say I'm with Brian. But what was the name of that other person we're playing doubles with? Like, my mind doesn't necessarily work that way, but the numbers always clicked. And in healthcare, it's very similar. Like the data, the statistics, the studies. We were talking about COVID from the very beginning. You could predict what it was going to do. It wasn't that hard to understand. I still don't know why people didn't understand it because it followed a path that viruses follow. But you have to think that way. You have to
Yeah.
think, and it isn't even outside the box. It's breaking things down to the core, and I think that's what you're doing in business. Like you can't be outfoxed because you're already two steps ahead with what's going on in your mind, and I think that's part of it. It's interesting. I was reading. Obviously I know you, but I was reading about you and your background and a lot of things, and I know you have this life center. Which I want to ask you about, which is really cool about gene therapy and things. And one of the things you said, or it was written about you, was you had to assess where you wanted to be when you were at the very beginning. In other words, you visioned what you want, and then you backtrack to what you need to get there.
Right.
And talk about that. Tell me about that. That what you're doing.
Yeah. So I call it end back analysis, and the idea is that if you can be anything you want in life, and simplicity I think is the key. Just breaking things down in the simplest way. But you have to establish that as a baseline, and then figure out the steps you have to take from here to get to there. And I work backwards from where I want to be. I don't work forward from where I want to go. And we have a saying, step up to it and you'll live up to it. And we're building the largest manufacturer of cell and gene therapies in the world in King of Prussia. When I first told people that, they thought I had 16 heads. It's extremely complex science. It can change the world. People have cured blindness, leukemia, spinal atrophy, and other horrible diseases by creating Pac-Man cells and re-engineered genes. The problem is they couldn't manufacture the delivery system, the viruses, the vectors. And there was a simple mathematical equation. You needed a certain amount of toxicity for it to transmit the new gene in your body, but not too much, or the patient created antibodies, or worse yet, died. I thrive in those environments because it's just a mechanical exercise. So we sat down and said, okay, X gene has to be in a patient's body in a certain position, in a certain way, and we're injecting it in this location. We got to get it from here to there. What's the math behind that? I mean, I am way oversimplifying this one, and I have hundreds of PhDs and scientists that do that work for me, but I challenge them to focus on potency in the vector and not toxicity, because the more potent it is, the more powerful it is, the less vector you need by virtue of the fact that you have less virus, you have less harm to the patient, and you can get the job done. And by the way, it's cheaper, so we can deliver these therapies to patients for less money than they would have to otherwise pay, which will make them widely available to people, rich or poor, which is how I look at healthcare. But the whole idea was it can't be done. And when I hear that, the hair goes up in the back of my head, and I just lay out a plan. I said, all right, if we're going to have the largest manufacturer of these therapies in the world, what's that mean? In this case, it was 700,000 fetal labs, 2,200 employees, $1 billion of capital over time. And so we just started checking boxes. Who's the best guy to run this? Who's running the biggest one in the world now? Okay, let's go get him. Who's the smartest scientist in the world? I befriended a great guy, Jim Wilson, at the University of Pennsylvania. I called him relentlessly to get him to be my partner, because he was the godfather of genetic therapy and invented the AAV9 vector. And just hounded him. And we had a commonality. I was building the largest manufacturing operation. He was very frustrated with his manufacturers. So I'd like to say that he was a mentor to me in what the likeness of that should be, and gave me, all the frustrations he was experiencing as he invented these great sciences and couldn't get them to connect in patients. Even though many of his platforms have worked, there were many more that he wanted to cure that he couldn't, because they couldn't get it manufactured. So we partnered with him. So we had a great scientist, and then we went to Janssen and recruited a bunch of their scientists. They had made 1,000 different Vector, and so we created our own R&D shop, and we recruited the largest U.S.-based manufacturer, the head of that group, and the largest testing and analytics group, the head of that group, and we convinced them all to come work for us when we had nothing. We were working out of a conference room, but we laid out a vision, and we gave them all stock in the company, and we paid very well, and better than anybody else, because we had a bigger vision and we're building a bigger company, and they all joined us. I put a lot of our family money into it, more than was originally planned, like all these things. But on Christmas Eve, a company bought 35% of that business for $350 million, and we put all $350 million in the business. So now we're off to the races, and we've got customers, and we're building out our labs, and we've got hundreds of employees going to thousands of employees. We're attracting the best in class. We signed a partnership with Penn and with Jim Wilson. We're doing one now with Stanford. And so, we made a list of all the key ingredients, and I only want to play if we're going to be the best at something. I don't want to be second best. So we checked the box, Penn, Stanford, Harvard, Broad, et cetera. And one by one, we're getting them all to come on board. And our mission is simple. If we can perfect the manufacturing of these two therapies, there is no disease we cannot cure. And that's the nuance to cell and gene therapy, is it's one and done. If it works, you actually cure the disease. There's a great video with Carl June, with Emily Whitehead, where, they got her in a room, and she was a young 14-year-old girl and was dying, and had one shot, his program. And they put the cells into her, and she started to spike in a fever, and they had to make some pivotal decisions. They made them, and a day later, she woke up and there was no cancer. And just miraculous, world-changing things. And what they need to make all this work is manufacturing, is to be able to manufacture these vectors and these cells. And so I've made it my mission in life to be the finest manufacturer of these cells and viruses in the world. And we're not just taking what's out there and making it better. We're creating better product. So our R&D team is working on vector that could be 500 times more powerful than anything in the market, which makes it less harmful and a better delivery system. So we made out that whole list. I brought a great woman in named Audrey Greenberg. She's pretty much a superstar in biotech in the United States, and she's a great speaker and a female executive and a leader. And she and I just went and worked 24 hours a day to make that happen, and it happened. And we did the same in mental health and addiction with the Recovery Centers of America. We're now rolling out. We're the largest company treating substance use disorder now in the United States. We're now rolling out mental health capability in every one of our centers. And we've created a digital platform. We're just introducing today. I made an acquisition. We're going to start doing adolescent mental health. These are major health crises in the United States, but we have technology that can fix these problems. We just
I got to ask you this, because you could have, at this point in your life, you could have invested in a soccer team and made hundreds of millions. You could have done a lot of things. I noticed that a lot of the things you're doing, are life-saving, future of healthcare, addiction medicine, gene therapy. Is there a part of you that this is, and not a personal legacy, but a sense like, I want to leave a mark, having been here, that I can make life better for others? Is that part of why you chose this direction?
There's no doubt. We will not invest in a company that doesn't save a life or change a life anymore. And we're focused in 4 areas. Data, because all this is about data. The amount of analysis that goes on in healthcare, life sciences is just exponentially growing every single day. And if you can find one morsel of data that can save 1 million lives, it's worth it. And so we're investing millions of dollars in data and data infrastructure. If you think about your cell phone and the things you can do on your cell phone, all that's traveling through the same size pipes across the United States. And you can't put 5,000 times the amount of data through the same pipes and not have it break down. And so we're building data infrastructure, and we're empowering data analysis with a focus on IP security, because all these scientists are inventing things. I want to make sure that they're not getting knocked off internationally, and the ability to run big data to analyze all the things that we're doing. So data. The second thing we're doing is life sciences with a focus on transformative medicine. I only want to work on things that will change, in the case of life sciences, the curing of diseases for everybody in the world on a global scale. And so if we can create, and we, by the way, have them in the lab and have the numbers and have the data today, vector that's 500 times better than anybody else's vector out there, which makes it 500 times safer, 500 times cheaper, et cetera, et cetera.
More potent. Yeah.
There's, what's that?
More potent. I mean,
yeah, make it work. We're now working on capsids that can target the gene of interest. And so if you have a target and you got a better vector, right now we have vector that performs at 500 times, we can make it at 50 times. We're trying to make it at 500 times at scale, because you can get a petri dish to do something, but to be able to go do it for millions of people, something different. So, the second is life sciences, working on these transformative medicines. The third is neurogenetic. So you think about life. Like, I've been analyzing what I want in life. I'm your age, Brian. I think I'm 62. Mm-hmm. I have one girlfriend, one second wife, one third wife, one first wife, one trophy wife, and she's all the same girl. I don't need another girlfriend. I'm the happiest guy in the world. I got great kids. Thank God they're healthy. And I think about what everybody craves. And what everybody craves is inner peace. Everything you do in life is in search of inner peace. Mm-hmm. Some people do it in sports, other people buy stuff. People have relationships, but it's all about getting inner peace and harmony and being able to function normally with a great deal of peace in your heart. And, neurodisease, in my opinion, is the most discriminating disease in the world. And if you think about it, we are working on cures of cancer and working on cures of all kinds of rare diseases that no one gives a damn about, but we give a damn about it. And Jim Wilson has taught me that. And I now I'm 100% behind him and want to support everything he does. I'm a behind the scenes enabler of great revolutionary people like Jim Wilson. But, if you get cancer, people are bringing food to your house. They're picking you up and driving you to your appointments. Everybody's giving you tender, loving care and special attention. And it's debilitating and oftentimes deadly, but the world surrounds you. In neurodiseases, the world runs from you. If you have a heroin addiction or a alcoholism problem, or, you're mentally ill, or you have, severe depression or anxiety, because the symptoms of those diseases can be very off-putting. And so we label those patients negatively. The term drug addict, when I hear that, I say, what in God's name do you know about addiction that entitles you to say such a demeaning word to that person? And so we have broken our view in this business down into three categories: identifying the source, treating the symptoms, and eliminating the contributors. And so when I first got in this business, I thought, the source of drugs is drugs and alcohol. But we found in 83% of our patients, it was severe mental illness, oftentimes trauma, PTSD. I mean, think about veterans. We send these young kids over to Afghanistan. They watch their friends get blown up in half, and they're shooting young kids on the other side in the brain. And we expect them to come back and be normal, and there's nothing there for them. And so they've had this immense trauma and PTSD. Just think about somebody that drives an ambulance or police today. To me, the disrespect that we show police officers in the United States because of a few bad actors. You look at the numbers, like 17 million stops and, 90 cases of police abuse, and yet we're labeling every police officer as bad. We're underfunding them. we're suspending them, we're treating them like garbage, and we're letting criminals out at night. So you have a police officer that's seeing death and giving CPR and trying to save somebody that's dying of a heart attack and delivering babies and breaking up gang wars and protecting people from old and young. And they're completely treated like garbage, just like the veterans that came back from Vietnam. And they have all this internal stress and PTSD. And so oftentimes they drink. And that's why every cop show you see ends up in a bar at the end of the night, because they're self-medicating to relieve severe mental illness caused from PTSD and trauma. And so what we focus on now is, okay, let's get to that source. Let's find out if it's PTSD, trauma, depression, anxiety. It could be all the above. Let's treat that. And the first thing we have to do is detox the patient. That's the neuro approach. Let's treat every form of mental illness so that we can then treat the symptoms, which are oftentimes alcohol and drug abuse. And or it could be the source is alcoholism and drug abuse, and oftentimes today caused by a concierge doc who was incented by the U.S. government to have his patients not have pain, because it was the first thing on the questionnaire, and we prescribed oxy.
Started with that. I was fighting that for years. Why is there a pain scale? Why are you being evaluated by pain? We would do these things in the hospital. I'm like, you're feeding in to a problem, because you're telling people they will get paid based on the fact that they treated pain. And if the patient then doesn't get the pain treated, they also evaluate you as a worse caregiver because you also didn't make them happy. And and then it became this vital sign. And I remember fighting like crazy. You could say, again, to your point, Brian, you could see it was going to be a problem. Like it was so obvious. And then you saw funding that was leading to it. You said, okay, there's money to be made out of this. Somebody has gotten to somebody and is pushing this. And we've been fighting that for, you're right, 2 decades.
So what happened? So the federal government said to doctors, we're going to lower your pay, and then we're going to give it back to you in the form of bonuses, and the first bonus is going to be about pain. So Big Pharma, that's what they do. They said, okay, doctors need to issue pain meds because now the U.S. government, and no one talks about this, has decided that's the number one thing on the survey that they want to see go away. So we became a country of pain prescribers. So now we give these kids opioids, and we don't give them 2 of them. We give them 30. By the time they're through that bottle, they're addicted. They start buying them on the street after they get 3 bum scripts afterwards, and they're, $30 a pill, taking 10 a day, 300 a day. They have no pain. And so, but they have a craving. They can't afford that habit. They buy heroin for $5 a bag. In the old days, in the 70s, pain of the needle was a dividing line. People didn't want to put the needle in their arm, so they didn't do heroin. There were plenty who did, but many who didn't. Now they've been taking painkillers all day, every day. You put the needle right in their eye, they won't even feel it. And so anything to get rid of the pain of addiction. So we're all over that, and we lobby for it. We've gotten insurers to reimburse, and we're treating those diseases every single day. And then the last thing is contributors. How do we put people in an environment where they can succeed? And that's about AA and NA. It's about outpatient, PHP and IOP and general outpatient, and creating communities. We just launched a community where you can get to an NAAA meeting 24/7 in 100 countries and 400 cities. So if you get up in the middle of the night and you're having a bad night, rather than going and having a drink or injecting a drug, you can go onto our system and you can get into a meeting and talk and communicate. We have thousands of people in that alumni that will help you. And so we're very focused on neurogenetics. The other thing we're finding is, and I own a number of genetic testing companies, is people are misprescribed. So if you think of the psychiatric industry, psychiatrists weren't getting reimbursed. So they said, screw it, I'm going to go to my house and I'm only going to take private pay or the private insurance people who will pass. Good news of that was financially, the psychiatrist made more money. The bad news was they didn't have a relationship with colleagues. So they weren't able to stay up on the latest developments, problems, etc. And so they begin prescribing whatever the latest fad drug is, sold by the person who stopped by their office to sell it. And without regard to the genetic impact or the metabolic impact on the patient. So we created a pharmacogenetic test that we now have tremendous data on that basically says you can take this, you can't take that. And if you take this, it'll work. And if you take that, it won't. And in the case of drugs like Plavix, it could kill you. And what we realized, I metabolize different than you, and we're both different than Miriam, and so on and so forth. And so depending on what your metabolic makeup is, there are definite negative reactions.
Personalized medicine. You're taking it to the person.
Exactly. And I'm going to tell you the cruelty of this one. We had an uncle, Hayden Wolfington, terrific, brilliant guy. And he had mental illness. And the doctors prescribed him a number of different medicines that made him deathly ill. So we didn't take the medicine. We didn't take the medicine. The symptoms of his mental illness, were pervasive. And so the family would come into our living room, and all the brothers and sisters would sit there with the psychiatrist, and they say, "No, Hayden, you're not taking your medication." He'd say, "You know what? The medication makes me sick." So we got into the drug and alcohol treatment business, and I start reading files. Psychiatrist says patient isn't taking the medicine. Patient saying medicine makes me sick. I wanted to solve that mystery. So we bought a company called Genetworks, and they had put together a pharmacogenetic test that can tell them, one test, once in your life, your body metabolizes this way, and these are the drugs you can take, and these are the ones you can't take. And what happens in mental illness is you get the wrong prescription, it makes you sick. And you're trying to do the right thing, so you take that medicine. You go to your doctor, the medicines make me sick. What do? They give you another medicine, which they compound on top of the medicine that's already making them sick, and then they get sicker, and another one, and another one. That's why we saw these patients, 70 pounds, jaundiced skin, can't eat, because they're misprescribed. So one of the things we're doing is we take them in and we detox them off of everything. We do a PGX test, and we establish a profile. And based on that profile, we say, okay, you want to lead your life taking these medications. And oftentimes it's not a 100-degree shift. It's 10 degrees left to right, and all over-the-counter available medicines. And you don't want to take these. Once we have that profile, we're now building a software system called Patient Bio, where we're going to put a ton of stuff there. And I'll give you an example. How many apps do you have? If you're my age and you're out doing things, you have a app from Penn and an app from Mainline, an app from this, app from that. So we're going to consolidate all that onto one platform. We're also going to put profiles.
What's that? You were going to say you're also going to
put the profiles on there. So you go to a CVS drug, pull it up, and you look at your prescription. I can't take that one. I need to take that. Call your doctor and fix it.
That's
and
what
build it into their EHR, record, so that we're informing doctors who don't know about pharmacogenetics. And the other thing we found is the reports were initially 90 pages with all this mathematical data which no doctor could read. So we have a summary now we're putting on the front. Take this, don't take that. Simple.
I love it. Now, this is great. Like what I've been doing the last 10 years, I said TV was great, radio was great, like fun, I still do it, but I thought, I'm seeing patients. I started getting into electronic medical records as a doctor and said, this is such a flawed system. It has so much potential. And now my role is I'm a chief health informatics officer now, where I, like in the whole mid-Atlantic region, I'm doing that. But basically trying to take electronic records and digital technology and take these things and make sense of it for the patient, because no one's looked at it that way. It's been engineers, it's been others, it's been third-party payers, but no one said, well, wait a minute, you've got a portal and everybody can get into that portal. You can not just schedule your appointments, but you can find out, to your point, the personalization of the medications, what's going on, and take that data anywhere, any place, and use it and it's just been kind of sitting there. No one's taken it to that
Well,
next.
well, I'll tell you, Brian, the other thing that's missing, you got to make it easy for the provider, for the doctor.
Mhm.
So part of what we're building in our system is a, mobile activated front end on an EHR. So think about a doctor doing rounds in a hospital. They may see 30 to 40 patients, and then they've got to go to a station, sit in front of a computer, 6 screens to get an aspirin, 5 screens to do notes. And you say, well, gee,
Yep.
why don't you have your note? We're not going to pay you because you don't have your notes there. Well, the reason I have my notes there is there's only 24 hours a day. And if it takes 6 screens to get an aspirin, I can't work till 2 in the morning because I do need a few hours worth of sleep. So we look at patient bio as bi-directional. And that is the nuance. So it's got to be easy for the doctor to input data.
Yep.
And it's got to be easy for the patient and the doctor to extract data. Like PGX is only working as we make the reporting simple and accessible. Because if a doctor can't understand it, they're not going to follow it. And we're taking that a step further and we're saying, okay, if we want a true patient bio, we need all the notes. And we can't have doctors having work after work, which they all have, as you know.
All that
because
side they
these
call it.
EHRs suck.
Yep.
We got to make it easy. So they put an 8-hour day, they can go home, have dinner with their family, get a good night's rest, and focus on making it easy for the patient. So we're creating point-click features on this system that will enable caregivers to get notes from the patient, by the way, as you're doing an interview, so that the information's come back to the patient. It's going right into the EHR system live and accurate.
Wonderful.
Order aspirin and do their orders, online, on their cell phone, all point click, multiple choice. No need to go to 17 screen. I want to order an aspirin, type aspirin, pulls up, hit a button, boom, ordered. And every other, drug that goes along with it. So that's something I want to talk to you about if you're in charge of informatics, because I think that'd be very helpful to you.
Absolutely.
As an owner of multiple hospitals. I mean, I've spent $750 million on that business. I began to study the plight of nurses and doctors, and it's horrific. And so our big focus is get their lives easy first, so they can do a better job getting the lives of our patients.
Oh, no, you're so right. In fact, my wife and I never argue, but I will tell you, she was working as a data abstractor, and one day she was just saying something about something. I said, you know what? Doctors are doing this because somebody had the idea and they can make them. They now have a computer and said, hit this metric, hit this metric. And I said, you know what they're doing? They're doing 12 to 20 metrics a day, and they're not seeing their patients and caring for them. That is your problem. They're hitting. And she goes, you never yell at me. I said, I'm sorry for yelling. I will pull back. But what it was the frustration of a physician. And I see that, and there is so much potential. So what you're talking about, you're right there. And I don't want to take your whole night. In fact, we've had a great conversation, but I will tell you, if you take this conversation from the very beginning, what you've really done is, and if anybody, who has stayed and watched this whole thing, you have taken a skill set that you have, which is assessing situations, using numbers, using data, and then surrounding yourself with people, giving them credit when they have ownership and credit is due, and using their talents with the vision. And those things, you can almost take that anywhere. I just, for those of us who are watching, I'm just glad you did it in healthcare, because I think, honestly, any one of these things can save lives. All of them together have incredible potential. So I want to thank you for, taking what's now 45 minutes of your busy day talking about this. I really enjoyed it. It was great to reconnect anyway, but I just really found it fascinating and appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. It's been fun seeing you too. And I do remember those days.
It is
One
great.
of my favorite days in my life is, teaching all of our children how to play basketball
And we were
t-ball.
we were such great athletes. We were able to impart our great athletic ability.
No, definitely not. But we were great thinkers. And I was not a great athlete. I didn't have any coaching experience, but I was fortunate enough to coach a couple Holy Child teams with a handful of girls that won, every game. And the reason was we applied simple theory. Shoot the ball every chance you get, steal the ball every chance you get, and no opponent gets past half court without you taking the ball away from them. 3 concepts. And
Philosophy. Although I will tell you, I had a parent. I coached the girls, and I had a parent who told me he basically there was a discussion on the course. One child had a problem with another child, and the other team was going to forfeit. But I said, well, no, we don't want to forfeit for these kids. And I remember walking back, this parent yelling out, "You are such a bad coach. You won't even take a forfeit." And I just remember laughing hysterically, but that was so much fun.
yeah.
And
And by the way, last time I checked, we're not able to forfeit in business. You can't forfeit in medicine. You're in the game. You're in the game. You got to see it through.
you are so right. Brian O'Neill, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the Dr. Brian McDonough Show. And thanks for watching. I appreciate it.
The Dr. Brian McDonough Show.